Just want to hear them.
A good evening to everyone. I thank everyone for joining us this evening on this topic, which I believe has become more and more common since, thank God, we have a longer lives and we're blessed with parents that live longer. But with every blessing comes many challenges, and amongst them, the challenge of dementia. And this evening, specifically, we're going to deal with an aspect of us as children of parents or loved ones that are suffering from dementia, especially when it comes to managing challenging behaviors and anger outbursts of dementia patients. Most specifically, three questions that we put front and center in the flyer for this evening. Number one, when ultimately love meets frustration,
51.
how can we transform moments of aggression into opportunities for compassionate care to our loved ones? Number two, are we properly treating our loved ones, or are we just treating the symptoms? A question that happens and is true anytime you go to a doctor, but all the more so when you deal with this issue. And finally, does our religious perspective as Jews and as believing Jews change our approach to challenging behaviors? So without further ado, I'd like to call upon Rav Yuval Shirlo, who, amongst many things, is the head of the ethics department of Tzohar, as well as the head of Tzohar Ad Mea Ve'esrim, to open this evening. Harav, bevakasha.
Good evening, Erev Tov. I'll start with apologizing about my English because this is not the language I speak at home, and my parents made Aliyah in 1949, and we didn't speak English at home, but I'll do my best. I think that, as you said when you opened your words, we're really blessed. And our life is much longer, our parents live longer, and we have very good health care. But the problem is that the connection between our body and our brain has a lot of difficulties. Many of our parents their brain is completely okay, but the body is actually uh, declining, and dementia is the opposite. We decided this evening not to deal with the entire issue of dementia. We had a lot of webinars and we will have more about it, but it's something that is really special. And that is, but usually when you say dementia, you think that people are becoming more quiet, more close, you can't speak with them, they don't recognize us, etc. But there is also a different um, way of living with dementia, and that is aggressive in violence and behavior that is very, very problematic. And I think it's the right thing to do, that sometimes to gather together and to deal with this niche of the way that this dimension is appearing, and we'll deal together from the medical point of view, from healthcare, and from ethics and halacha, because it's really very, very sensitive. So thank you for coming together and being with us, because probably there'll be a kind of a dialogue through this night, because it's really a very, very sensitive and very, very difficult issue. And we'll try to do our best in order to find a way how to behave and what to do in those or under those circumstances. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rav Sherlo. And I'd like to introduce the first speaker of this evening, and that is Dr. Dana Pe'er. Dr. Dana Pe'er, who's with us, is a PhD in genealogy, aging care, and occupational therapy, and obviously has a lot of experience with some of the challenges and more that Rav Sherlo just presented to us. And I believe that one of the goals of this evening is indeed, as Rav Sherlo said, not to allow this behavior to get under our skin, but rather to know how to deal with it professionally. And therefore, we're very blessed to have Dr. Pe'er with us. So without further ado, Dr. Pe'er.
Hello, good evening to all. I'm honored and so pleased that you found the time, and I appreciate the fact that you found the time to join us and to make yourselves more aware and educate us yourselves about this issue, because as I'm sure you've probably heard, dementia or learning to speak dementia is like learning another language. Okay, because oftentimes what we do in the context of dementia care is intuitively not necessarily the best thing that we can do. And oftentimes, by following our intuition in trying to care for a person with dementia, we will find ourselves in a situation of an angry outburst, of challenging behaviors. So, I'm going to discuss what is the background for the appearance of these challenging behaviors or these angry outbursts. And I'm going to give you a few do's and don'ts. More do's than don'ts. I've practiced this. It's very important to be more positive and give you ways that you can cope and deal with the situations. But we're going to start with the what you don't do. So I'm going to start with what is the background, what causes it, how can we understand these angry outbursts. They don't just appear out of nowhere. There's something that is happening there that causes or brings about. I'm not going to say causes because obviously nobody wants to do this on purpose, but it happens. So let's try to take a little perspective of what is dementia. One of the misconceptions of dementia or about dementia is that people think it's memory loss. Okay, we forget experiences, we forget things we were supposed to do, we forget all kinds of tasks or how to do things, people that we used to know. That's usually the way people think of memory loss and dementia. One of the aspects of memory loss in dementia is also forgetting words, forgetting language skills, or losing our language skills, the ability to come up with the right word for the name of something, or the ability to put together a sentence that is comprehensive and coherent for people who are listening to us. Now, this is something that happens in dementia. For some people, it will be from the very beginning, we'll find that there are language difficulties, which when mostly the dementia is affected in the temporal lobe. But for all people with dementia, there is a diminishing capacity to use language, to understand language, but also to express themselves through language. A person who is no longer able to put together a coherent sentence also has great difficulty in understanding what is being said to them. Okay. Now, anger in itself is a very important feeling. It happens when I am setting limits about what is good for me, what my expectations are, what is not good for me. It's a way of communicating to the world my personal boundaries, my limits, what is acceptable or unacceptable for me. Okay, so in and of itself, it's a functional feeling. We need it. It's not there for no reason. Now, sometimes I get angry. Not a lot. I try to, and it happens sometimes that when I am angry, I find it difficult to express myself, to say exactly what is making me angry. Okay, even sometimes I curse because that's the first thing that comes to mind. I'm angry, I'm miffed, and I say something that is not necessarily socially acceptable, not something that I was taught or brought up on. And I express myself this way. Now, my brain, as far as I know, is working rather well. Okay, so we have to consider that even people whose brain is perfectly functional, even when they are in a state, some psychologists call it a hot state. Okay, they're in a hot state. They're in a very emotionally charged state, and it's anger. They will express themselves in ways that are not necessarily intellectual or socially, and actually are socially frowned upon. So a person with dementia who has a diminishing capacity to express and use language as a way to say what they feel will actually act out what they feel. The acting out will often be cursing or outright physical violence, throwing things, breaking things, things that they're just like expressing how they feel through behavior rather than using the mediator of language, which is no longer available to them as it used to be in the past. Okay, so this is what I want you to understand as the background for why these things happen. Now, a person with dementia might be getting angry, or it looks like they're angry, and there is an outburst when actually what is happening is not something that we would expect them to be angry about, but rather it's that they don't really understand what is being said, or someone is talking to them and they seem to understand, but then the person touches them and they were not expecting that because they didn't in fact understand, okay? Or that they're feeling rushed or stressed because you're trying to get somewhere and they're like, come on, come on, come on, come on. That makes them angry and they will act it out. Or it could be when they are frustrated or they're disappointed, whether it's something that I did or something that someone else did or something that doesn't work, like the computer sometimes makes me very frustrated, or anything like that. Whereas a person with a functioning brain may be able to channel their frustration, their disappointment into socially acceptable ways, even if it's, writing things down or saying something to the refrigerator, which they're not happy, or whatever. But when it's a person with dementia, they will lash out because on top of what I've just so far mentioned as part of dementia, the diminishing capacity for language, the difficulty with expression, the difficulty to understand what is going on, there is also, let's not forget, the atrophy of the frontal lobe. Okay, the frontal lobe, which is up here in front, is in charge or regulates our social interactions, our inhibitions, everything that we learned about how to behave in public, in a social situation, that we should be able to delay our gratification, that it's not all about you, and things like that. So a person with dementia is actually, and this is true for all the types of dementia, not just the ones that are called frontal dementias, all types of dementia have some sort of atrophy in the frontal lobe, so that the person has a more and more disinhibition of their behaviors. And we'll find them saying whatever comes to mind, okay? Whether it's some derogatory expressions, whether it's some sort of racist expressions or sexist expressions, things that they never said before, and now it just comes up to mind, and there's like there's no to keep them from talking. It just flies out their mouth. And they will also see lesser delay of gratification. When they want something, they want it now. And you say, well, 10 minutes. You're like, no, 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 no. I need it now, because this is all the gratification delayance is done by the frontal lobe, which is not working so well. And they may not understand social situations when you're trying to tell them, well, this is not acceptable. Don't do this, don't do that. And they don't see other people's needs, okay? Empathy is also connected to the amygdala in our brain, which is also kind of being atrophied, and the frontal lobe. So even if one of the things that happens, like the person with dementia doesn't get what they want right now, because there is some sort of difficulty for the caregiver, but they don't understand that the caregiver has difficulty, and that would cause an outburst. Now, it's not fair. I totally agree. It's not fair at all. But this is what is happening in the brain of the person with dementia. Okay, so now that we've understood what is happening or what causes this, I'm saying not causes, but is like the background for why these things happen. What should you do, or what should you not do? We're going to start with what do not do. Do not try to explain your position, or try to explain and reason with them why this needs to be, why they should do this, why they should accept this. This is not going to work. We are not, what I'm saying is actually do not insist that they see your point of view. They are not going to see your point of view. It's not going to happen, okay? So trying to reason with them and say, but you need to understand, the answer is no, they do not need to understand. They probably will not understand. And if they do, it will be fleetingly and it will just like pass by. You're going to have to keep doing the same thing over again. Do not use if-then sentences or threats. If you do this, then I will. If you don't do this, then you will. Or threats, you have to stop or I will hit you back. That's not going to work. It's only going to escalate the situation. We're trying to de-escalate the situation. So these are things that we're not going to do. What should we do? Okay. So like I said, I have more suggestions here. Things that we should do are really, if we think about, they're kind of intuitive, and I'm going to recommend them to keep you and the person with dementia safe, okay? Because if they hit you, it's very, very, it just throws you off and you're like ready to hit them back. Now, I say this as a person, a caregiver, who has had their fair share of slaps and other cursing and things like that. So I've been there. I know what it's like. It's really difficult in the moment to keep your cool and to work cerebrally, which is what I need to do, because the person with dementia is definitely not using the cerebral cortex to do what needs to be done. So the easiest thing and the first thing I would suggest is stop what you're doing, okay? Just stop. Most things do not need to be done exactly right now, okay? So you just stop. Stop what you're doing. Stop dressing them. Stop pushing them. Stop trying to coax them. Stop explaining. Stop whatever it is. Just stop what you're doing, okay? Take a few steps back. Now, if possible and safe for the person with dementia and for you, take a time out, because you need it. They need it. Everybody needs it. The whole situation needs to de-escalate. Take a time out. Go into another room if they are safe where they are. Okay? Go into another room, scream into a pillow, bang the door. I don't know, but just take a time out as long as they're safe, because you needed to calm down, to calm yourself down. If you are not calm, the person with dementia picks up on your energy, your stress, your frustration, your anger, and that will not enable you to de-escalate the situation. One of the things that we often say or suggest that you should try saying is, I'm sorry. My husband says I need to be saying this much more often. I'm thinking about it, but generally speaking, I am very pro saying I'm sorry. Now, don't say like, well, I'm sorry, because they know you don't mean it. It's, I'm sorry for upsetting you. I'm sorry that I made you feel that, and take the responsibility upon yourself. Don't say, well, I'm sorry you feel that way, because that is not a true apology, as we all know, because you're throwing it at them. It's their responsibility. We take the responsibility upon ourselves as a gift to the person with dementia and say, you know what? I was in the wrong. Even if you were the best possible caregiver in that situation, give it as a gift by taking the responsibility upon yourself. Another thing that we should do, that this is the immediate response, but generally speaking, we need to adjust our expectations after an anger outburst and bring them down. Demand less, not expect them to go back to being happy and very cooperative. Bring our expectations down. Our demands should be less clear, and, just like open up a space of chilling out as much as possible. If you are hurt or you are hit by someone with dementia, even if they're cursing at you and it hurts your feelings, it's really important to share it with somebody else. Please do not keep this to yourself. You should also tell this to the formal caregivers, whether they're the foreign aid workers, anyone who is in a situation, in altercation with a person with dementia. I think it's very important to share with somebody else, to get it off our chest, to know that we have someone else to support us, okay? Because being a caregiver to a person with dementia is long and very, very challenging. Now, the last thing I want to recommend for you, if the outbursts happen over and over again, because sometimes it'll be like an isolated case, which is do everything I said up until now, and definitely share it with others. But if these things happen over and over again, we need to do some sort of work. We're going to call it some sort of detective work, okay, of how we can prevent, because prevention is obviously the best we can do to prevent these situations. And there is an approach which is called DICE. Finally, I can say it in English and people don't understand me. The DICE is an abbreviation of 4 steps: describe, investigate, create, and evaluate. What does this mean? First, you describe, and it's best to do this while writing it down. Describe the situation, describe the background of what happened and what happened. Investigate, usually with another person if you can, whether it's a family member or a healthcare professional. Investigate what may have been the other needs of the person with dementia. What were the factors that I, as a caregiver, brought into the situation and might be doing differently? What were the circumstantial factors that maybe we can change? Maybe we should do this particular task in another room rather than in this room, or at a different time during the day. Things like that. Create a plan, what you can do differently for the next time, because this is something that happens repeatedly. And then evaluate whether the plan that you created really does influence and bring down the number of angry outbursts that they are. Now, you can look this up on the web. It's called the DICE approach. Like I said, just write DICE dementia approach. You'll find it. This is a whole, there's a lot of literature about it. There's some research into it, and you can find information about it on the web, and it's pretty much free and available. So please consider doing that after you did everything else that I mentioned earlier. So this is what I had to say about how to cope and how to try to deal with angry outbursts and challenging behaviors. And I'm going to pass it on to Rabbi Cheryl.
Thank you very much, Dr. Peher, for that wonderful both analyzing the situation that many of us find ourselves in, and finally how to deal with it. And indeed, I'd like to call upon Rav Sherlo to continue, and amongst many things, maybe also relate to a few of the things you said. And if I can pick two that go against perhaps the way we act with others, even though much of what you said is not exactly the way we act with others. Number one is no threats. And in Judaism, there's no secret. We say it twice a day in the Shema. There is sachar va'onesh. There is reward and punishment. And number two, to say I'm sorry, even if you don't mean it, to sort of say a white lie, as we call it in English, in order to deal with this situation. So without further ado, Rav Sherlo, bevakasha.
Shalom. I'm going to talk from 2 different perspectives. First of all, I don't have good suggestion what to do. I'm going to speak about the roots and going to ask ourselves those kind of questions. What are the roots? What are the idea? What is the ethical and the halachic approach towards those problematic situations? The second thing, I'm going to speak and when we'll come to the 3rd stage, because Dr. Peher made a really terrific presentation about prevention. That's the first step. And the second step is still when we can do all kinds of things in order to avoid this violence or curse or whatever. But sometimes doesn't work. And we are reaching I'll call it the third step or the third floor when there's a lot of screaming and anger and we don't know exactly what are the rules, what are the ethical and the idea that is behind them. So I'll start first of all with presenting the dilemma and both sides. From one side, we are talking about a person that is not guilty. He's not guilty. It's not freedom of choice. It's not, as we call it, bchira chofshit or whatever. He is sick. And his decisions or his behavior is not something that I can blame him. And we always must remember it because we are, we are used to our approach usually is that a person is responsible to what he does. But in this situation, it's not the truth. The second thing is we have a great mitzvah, kibud av va'em, to honor our parents. Most of the time, it's our parents, but also if it's not our parents. We have a great mitzvah to honor ואהבת לרעך כמוך, to honor everyone, to understand him, to try to do the best thing for him or whatever. And we do believe that a person has his autonomy. But in this case, he's using his autonomy in order to cause damage, in order to cause pain, and to endanger himself and us. And it's becoming impossible. And people will stop visiting him or will stop coming. We have a lot of questions in Zohar Ad 120 when someone says, my wife feels that she can't come anymore to my parents because my father, when he comes, he screams, he yells, the kids are afraid or whatever. So something will happen to him if this situation will continue. From the other hand, first of all, there is an ethical halachic approach that usually we are not familiar with it, and it seems like being very, very, very taking only our interests. But the halacha says, "Shelcha kodem leshel kol adam." Yours comes before everyone else. Now it seems something wrong because usually it's a like we are trained to take care of other people, to honor our parents, whatever. But the halacha says even towards kibud av va'em. First of all, our needs is the first thing. And because of two reasons. First of all, the halacha and the ethical approach of the halacha says that we have our identity, we have our freedom of choice, we have our interests, and it's very important. And B, because if we will not fulfill our needs in our abilities and everything that we need, or at least some of the things we need, we will not be able to take care in a very gentle way towards someone else. More than that, the mitzvah to honor our parents is actually does not allow for hardship and abuse us when they are deciding to do that, but also in those circumstances, it's limited. We don't have to sacrifice everything, our family, our needs, our security, our whatever that in order to do those things. This is the other hand, and as I said, harm that will be caused to the patient himself. So how do you decide in such a question what to do? To use pills in order, without his informed consent, without his agreement, in order to relax, to tie him, to what to do. So how do you make the decisions? There is a very ethical path or road that is enabling to at least find a way to think about those questions. And in ethical questions, you need to ask, in the first place, what is the starting point? What is the departure point? The standing point is not necessarily the end point, it's not the destination. But first of all, we have to find where do we start to the debate and how to formulate our decisions. So according to the ethics approach, and as I said, also the halachic, the starting point is, of course, human dignity and respect and understanding and trying and doing all the things that Dr. Peer said so, it's so logic when you hear it, and it's really something that we should do according to these behavior rules or whatever. And this is actually our, as I said, departure point. But we have to remember that there are reasons and there are circumstances that there is time where we need to understand that it's not working. And unfortunately, and it's very, very sad and problematic to say, but we should be very careful with the accepting these things, because, as I said, two bad things will be the consequences. The first thing is that we will not be able to do that. And we have, as I said, our needs and our rights and other freedom. But also, it will be very, very problematic towards our parents, because people will leave them. The foreign worker will not agree to continue to work here. Our family will not come to visit, and we will not be able to have them for Leila Seder or for Shabbos or all the connection. And it's endangering them and us together, because sometimes it's really throwing things and using violence. So there is, as I said, a way of thinking of those in a track or a route. You start with your observation point of doing everything in order to respect, in order to understand, in order to try, in order to prevent, in order to do all those important things that we will not come to this point. But once we reached this point in this process, we have to understand that according to halacha, according to ethical rules, it's not that we have to sacrifice everything and do everything in order to find a way or to please or to really, as I said, sacrifice our freedom and our family and our work and our future and our present. The halacha says that you have to balance. You have to balance, and we have the right, and even sometimes it's the necessity to be and to take care of ourselves. So actually, there are three rules or three principles. When is the time that we have to use a different policy? The first thing is when there's a necessity, when we tried to prevent, when we tried all the good suggestions of what we heard from Dr. Peer, and it's not working, and we are under danger. So this is the first point, the necessity to understand that we have to do something else in order to avoid damage and harm and bad consequences. The second thing is proportionality. I mean, when we are using, for instance, medicine, or when we have to use some power in order to stop, in order to avoid this situation, it has to be the minimum of the minimum of the minimum that is possible. And it's part of our commitments and part of our obligation to try to do as less, or to use, excuse me, to try to use as less as skills or instruments in order to that are using power. And the third thing is avoidance of abuse. I mean, we have to be very careful that we are trying to solve one problem, but in the meantime, we are causing a bigger and a most problematic issue where we are causing more harm than finding a solution. Now, it's very difficult to speak about those situations and those circumstances, but we have to admit that sometimes we are reaching the edge. Sometimes it's really dangerous. Sometimes it's not only when we don't feel comfortable and things are happening at home and we prefer that it will be more relaxed or whatever. Sometimes it's really dangerous. And we have to identify those situations and work according to these rules. Start with the point of departure, as I said, to honor, to try, to prevent, to do everything else. But when there is a necessity, when you are working according to proportionality of using this power, and when you are very careful not to open another door when you are closing the door that you're closing, then this is the very sensitive way of behaving according to ethical and according to halacha point of view. I think that the most important thing that is said is that we have to get used to that we have also needs. We have also rights, but it's not a language, it's not a discourse of rights or commitments. It's also a discourse of reality. If we will not take care of ourselves and if we will not consider our needs, then probably for long distance, we will not be able to continue and to do the good things that we want to do, and we want to respect and to honor our parents and not to forget for a second that it's not their decision. They're not guilty, but the situation is impossible. You are on mute. You are still on mute. You are still on mute.
Thank you very, very much, Rav Sherlo, and for pointing out I was still on mute. And thank you, Dr. Pear. I think that if I can sum up Rav Sherlo's words in more halachic language, Rav Sherlo basically said that kibbud av va'em is not at all costs. And he mentioned many, many of the costs that eventually you have to say that it's affecting my own well-being, and therefore it's not at all costs. Which leads us to a few questions that already came in, and I invite everyone who would like to ask questions to please write them in the chat, and I'll be happy to be your voice. The first question that came in was addressed by Rav Sherlo at the end of his words, but we'd like to also hear what Dr. Pear has to say, and that is the following question. To what extent can sedatives of sorts, shapes, and sizes be used? And when is it better not to use the pharmaceutical approach, if I can call it that, and rather use other things like behavioral calming techniques?
Well, actually, I would say that one does not contradict the other, and the expectation of using pharmaceuticals in and of themselves as a solution to challenging behaviors, to difficult changes in behaviors in general, is a naive expectation, which is not probably going to be very disappointing for whoever holds this expectation. I've heard geriatricians that I hold in high esteem explain that the first line of treatment, the first, the second, the third, and the fourth line of treatment are non-pharmaceutical interventions, which we discussed so far. So I am pro pharmaceutical interventions as needed, because I think it's not only the caregivers, the family, the extended community who is having to, step up and deal and cope with anger outbursts or with challenging behaviors. I think from my experience with people with dementia that they themselves are suffering. They themselves are having a very challenging time engaging with the world. The anger outburst, like I mentioned before, is not because they woke up one day and they said, well, things are not exactly the way I want them. They are in a heightened state of anxiety. They are trying to figure out what is going on. And the confusion is very, very stressful. And if giving them some sort of medication will alleviate their stress and bring down their anxiety, I think that's the most humane thing we can do. And obviously, we're not going to what people call drug them and make them zombies. That is not the intention. And I'm assuming that we're all caring for people. Okay, we're caring, we're trying to do the best. So I'm not doing, if I give them a medication, it's not for myself necessarily as a caregiver. Sure, it will probably help me also in my caregiving, but it's first and foremost for the person themselves who is suffering a mental, psychological, emotional suffering that I can only imagine. And I'm seeing it in their behaviors. Okay, if they have a difficulty saying it, and psychotherapy will not help them because they can't express themselves, but they are expressing through their behaviors. So along with the medication that we give, very, very consciously, very carefully, constantly monitoring, is this working? Should we give less? Maybe we need a little more here, a little less there. Is this the right one? We should also be employing all the possible non-pharmaceutical interventions because it's always a part. They go hand in hand. You cannot just give a medication and expect everything to be howdy-doody. It's not going to work.
Thank you. The second question that I'd like to share is one that perhaps Rav Sherlo and Dr. Pe'er can tell us a bit more about, and that's the following. It came in from two different people, but I'm going to say it based on what's in the chat already, and that is the following question. If I could define it as follows. A person, basically, a father says, I want to drive a car, and we know that he's not able to. And he becomes, of course, very aggressive. I want to drive a car. This came in another context. We gave a caregiver to our loved one, could have been our spouse, and they insist, I don't need any help. I'm fine. Get rid of the caregiver. I don't get along with the caregiver. What should we do in this situation?
I'll start because practically I'll ask Dr. Pe'er to answer. But I want to, again, start with the roots from the ethical approach. The fact that they want, the word want, is completely different in those situations because ethical rules and halachic approach demands that the person will not cause damage to other people. It's dangerous. It's not only, I'll start, you know what, I'll start exactly like I said before. First of all, it's a very sensitive issue. To lose your ability to drive is not only functioning. It's not only that you can, have it go from one place to another place with a cab. It's really something very deep. I will say that you're losing part of your identity because you're not free anymore. You cannot apply exactly your wishes. You are in kind of a jail. So we have to understand it's really a very sensitive and a very difficult issue. But our commitments is, first of all, not to cause damage to other people, and driving when someone is not able to do that is very dangerous. And B, as I said before, the word want is now something different. It's not a kind of decision and checking and balancing and a logic process. It's like a baby that says he wants without understanding all the meanings and all the consequences of that. And this is the point, as I said before, that there is a necessity to stop and not to give him the option to continue to drive when it's dangerous, not the minute before, but when it's becoming dangerous and problematic. This is our responsibility to take care and to handle this situation. When we are talking about another question about the foreign worker, that's more difficult, or having a kind of assistance, it's much more easy even to say that, okay, you don't want any help, but we can't do it anymore. We have children, we have work, your wife is not able to take care anymore of that. It will fall on someone else. And again, this is the situation where we have to be responsible. We have to take the authority, be very, very careful not to do it too early. Be very, very careful not to ignore the fact that it's very sensitive. But from the ethical and from the halachic point of view, it's our responsibility to take care of this situation.
I'm going to speak from a more practical point, but Rav Shel will definitely address the main issue of the idea of diminished capacity for making judgment and understanding my abilities and my difficulties. People with dementia often have a symptom which is called a nose agnosia, which refers to an inability to assess their difficulties, to be self-aware of what they are able to do and what they are not able to do. So I understand, and like Rav Shelo said, the idea of having a driver's license is a person's independence. It's their identity. It's their feeling of freedom, of they can just go in and go somewhere. They often don't, but they feel that they can, and being not dependent on others, even if they live in a city and there's buses and whatnot. But we have definitely a commitment to other people. And hey, I'm on the roads also. I want the roads to be as safe as possible, and they're not that great at the moment. So please, let's try and do what we can. But beyond that, the person with dementia is unable to understand what might happen or what might not happen if they don't receive the assistance they need. Okay, they may think that they're independent, but yesterday I went through their fridge and threw out food from 3 months ago, and they would have eaten it, because there's also a change in the senses and the abilities to understand what is healthy and what is dangerous. So yes, we have to step in, not too early, like the Rav Shelo mentioned. For example, this morning I saw a post on Facebook from a daughter of someone who, in the dementia group, she says, I'm really concerned about my father. I want someone to come and live with him. I'm like, okay, but does he want something? And there was nothing about any danger. She just feels that he's lonely. Okay, and this is, it seems to me, just from reading the facts that she posted, it's too early. You don't feel comfortable. You're thinking ahead. You're like, well, let's try to avoid all kinds of possible situations. But oftentimes we'll cross the bridge when we come to it. We're not trying to do it now at the early stage of dementia, because maybe in 2 years we'll have a problem. That is not fair. That is not seeing the person and their needs, okay? Because if the person needs assistance, we need to step up and do it and bring in the assistance and find a way to make it more acceptable for them. But if it's just to make myself more calm so I can say, well, I don't have to answer the phone 3 times in an hour, that is not so acceptable in my opinion.
Thank you very, very much, which literally leads to the next question. And that is a question for Dr. Pear, and perhaps Rav Shelo can also weigh in on it. Is there an actual importance in getting diagnosed? Namely, we see a loved one who's beginning to decline, and we have a very strong suspicion that it's early signs of dementia. First of all, is there anything to be gained by being diagnosed? And secondly, if the person doesn't want to participate because it's hard news to live with, how do we go ahead and encourage them to indeed get diagnosed and hopefully treated to the best of our abilities?
I think in Hebrew we have, I think it's in Judaism, we have this saying, "En simcha ki atarat safek," right? Something like that. This is the reason, like the number one reason to get the diagnosis is this one. Okay, it's because living in doubt is very difficult for us. We humans like to have certainty. We like to know what it is. Give it a name and say that's what it is. So I think for families, more than for the person themselves, but for the family, getting the diagnosis and knowing that this is what it is. It's not my imagination. I'm not just making things up or blowing things out of proportion, but rather we really do have an issue here. It's good for the family dynamics, okay? Because first of all, there is value in getting a diagnosis as soon as possible, at the earliest stage possible. In the past year, 2 new medications have been approved by the FDA, and they are available in Israel, but only under private payment. And it's a little difficult, but they're only good for people at the very early stages of Alzheimer's, like even pre-Alzheimer's. So by the time you get the diagnosis, you're kind of late to the table, but maybe you'll still be able to get something out of these medications. And all the medications that are now in the pipeline are for early diagnosis, for pre-Alzheimer's. So there's great value in going and getting a professional opinion as soon as possible. I understand that people don't want it. I totally get that. I wouldn't want it either. Now, in Israel, there is professional duty obligation by the doctor to give the patient at least one time to tell them what their diagnosis is. Okay, so the geriatricians know that this is a complex issue and sensitive. And one of the things that we can do as family members is speak to the doctor before he gives the diagnosis and say, well, doctor, mom has always been terrified of getting Alzheimer's because her mother had it. So maybe you can use a different word. Or you can tell her there's a change in your cognitive ability, but you don't have to necessarily use the word Alzheimer's. This is a gray area, very gray. Okay, so ethics for doctors, I don't do that. But it's something that is debatable, and the doctors talk about it among themselves. I think many doctors are open to it if you approach them and explain that we're trying to do something that is better for mom. Now, generally speaking, I will say the main tenet of dementia care, in my opinion, is thinking of how whatever we do or say will affect the well-being, the emotional well-being of the person with dementia. And if I know that for my mother to hear that Alzheimer's will send her off in a tailspin, but if she hears dementia, it's not a big deal, then it's definitely legitimate to say to the doctor, please say the word dementia rather than Alzheimer's or whatever. So I think mostly, and after having said it once, there is no reason to continue saying it. I can say it to myself, to my sister, to my father, whatever, but there's no reason to keep going to the person and saying, well, you have dementia or you have Alzheimer's, which is why this and that. That's not going to work. So there is value mostly for the families themselves.
The halacha approach towards saying the truth or lying or trying to hide things is very interesting, and it's even in this parasha that we'll read on Shabbat is discussed because the brothers are actually lying when they're saying that Jacob made a will and asked Yosef not to punish his brothers. The approach is very interesting, and I really completely agree with Dr. Pe'er. When we can make decisions and when we are responsible and when our brain is really in a good shape, we must really run away from lying. We have to see the truth. We have to behave according to the word emet, and that's the most important thing that we have. According to our sages, they say that Chotamo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu is his signature is emet, is the truth. But when we are dealing with dimension from the point that saying the truth, not truth, reality, whatever, doesn't mean anything anymore. The only factor and the only indicator what to say or what not to say, if it's doing good for him or bad for him. And these situations are constantly. When he's very angry that his daughter didn't come to visit to him, and he's yelling that she must come immediately, you can say she'll come in 5 minutes. And then in those 5 minutes, he probably will forget it, whatever, even though it's not the truth, even though it's the opposite of the truth, etc. The only the core of our talking should be what's doing good and what's doing bad for him, because the idea and understanding what's the difference between the truth and things that are lying is not, he's not capable anymore to figure it out, and it doesn't have any meaning. We have to be very careful with ourselves not to get used to not saying the truth in other circumstances, but we must understand that there is a point that the only thing that we have to think is it good? Is it doing good or not?
Which leads me to another fascinating question. I just sent in the group chat a link to it in Hebrew. We haven't yet translated it into English, but it's definitely a fascinating question. Unfortunately, someone's wife died, a mother of a family and a wife, and the father started to decline cognitively to the extent that he goes out every day and actually collects money for his sick wife. Again, his sick wife is not alive anymore. When his children approach him on it, he gets very, very upset at them, saying, "You don't care about your mother. You never visit her in the hospital. I'm the only one that cares for her." So there's two questions that were asked in this regard. Number one, for Rav Sherlow. He happens to be a very successful fundraiser. He has a lot of money that he collected, and the family found a lot of money at home. What should they do with the money? They have no idea where it came from, and they have no idea who to return it to. And number two, for Dr. Pe'er, is basically how to deal with this on a professional level. The man thinks his wife is in the hospital dying, while his wife is, unfortunately, in the better world.
I'll
start with the easy question. Okay, the easy question is what to do with the money, and there's no way to return it to the people. And actually, there is a halacha in Shulchan Aruch that says that when you have money that you don't know who to return it to, maybe if you steal money but you don't know from whom, so you should take this money and do something for the public. לצורכי הרבים, as the halacha says. And I think we should use this halacha also in this case, because you can't use this money, you can't keep it. You got it and he got it because he was ill, because he said things that are not true. So we have to think and use this money in order really to help women that are in the hospital and they need money. And then, even though it's not his wife, it's not our mother because she unfortunately passed away, but to use this money for other people or for public needs in order to enhance, in order to promote their quality of life. This is the things that you think that you have to do according to halacha. But as I said, this is the easy question, how to avoid the future. I'll shift it to Dr. Pe'er.
Thank you. I get the hard one. Okay. So I would say that the Rav Shalom actually provide us the way out. Okay. Because for him, and I would also, I think of it as a sort of tzedakah, give it for tzedakah. That would also be fine, which is a mitzvah. So that's, for this person, the passing away of his wife is a very difficult thing that might happen in his life. Becoming a widow, losing her and missing her is obviously overwhelming, too much for him to be able to understand and to process. I would not insist that he has to understand that the wife has passed away. Okay, so as long as he's not harming anyone, and we agree that what the money that has been collected, whatever way he does it, will go to tzedakah or tzolchei harabim and not used for his personal benefit or for the benefit of his family, then I would not try to prevent it or to stop it. It will stop in and of itself, this behavior, at some point. And I don't think that the children should need to be so concerned about his kavod in other people's opinions. Because if you're constantly worried about how he seems, what people will think, even if it's the neighbors, and especially if the neighbors of the community know that the woman has passed away and still they give him money, they are doing a chesed with him. Why would we take that away from them? Okay, I'm going to assume it's not thousands and thousands of shekel from each person, because he's probably going from one to another, like 10 shekel there, 20 shekel here. It's a chesed that they're doing with him. So, and having the children say, well, it's not respecting him, it's going to be counterproductive for the children, who still have a long way to go through in this disease process. And if they start trying to confront him with the truth and get him to understand and repeatedly say, you are wrong, you don't understand, she is dead, or take him to her grave and take a photo of him there or a video of him there so that he will have proof that she has passed away, it's only going to make him very sad, very upset, very isolated, thinking that he is the only one in this world who really understands what is going on. His children have turned on him. His community has turned on him. Nobody loves him. Nobody understands him. And he is also very stressed because his wife is ill, in his opinion. So trying to prevent this behavior in ways that will try to bring him into our reality, I think will only cause everyone great stress and pain. And as long as we do think about it in the values of Judaism, of chesed and tzedakah, this is not something I would try to stop. It will stop in and of itself, like I said, at some point.
Which leads us to our final question for this evening. We've spoken a lot about how we relate to loved ones that are suffering from dementia and whatnot. But I'd like to shift the last question actually to the caregivers, to the family. And indeed, if you have someone that's suffering from everything, Dr. Pear, you mentioned, the outbursts and everything else, is it important to tell, let's say, the wife of such a person that he's suffering from dementia? Or maybe, you know, if she lives with it, it's better not to mention it, meaning it's important to define it for the caregivers, not for the person sick. Number two, and I'd like to direct this question to Rav Sherlow, how much of a mitzvah is it to visit when it's very unpleasant? I mean, very unpleasant for the daughter or the son, and of course the grandchildren, to see the outbursts, the cursing, and everything else.
I'll start. I think it's important because when we know that someone has a disease or an illness or a medical condition, we are so much more forgiving to whatever behavior they may present. We're able to find a place in our hearts to say, okay, it's not in they're not their free will, like the Rav Shelo mentioned earlier. It's not that they're choosing to behave this way. It's not that this is reflecting on our family relations, which may have been not that great in 20 years ago, and we're just continuing. No, this is a different condition. We're in a different position. This person is not able to control themselves, not because they don't want to, because they are unable to. There is something objective which has changed everything in there. I just want to give one little tip, if I may, about the cursing. Okay, it happens. There's something to do about it, and people don't know this, so I'm going to take my 2 minutes and say what you should do. Okay, if it starts like there's an outburst of cursing, and people will tell me like, I never knew she even knew these words. Where did she learn them? I've never heard her say them in like 70 years, and suddenly it's coming out. So if a person is cursing, like in an outburst, there are several things you can do to try and stop this. And it's not saying, well, that's not nice. Don't do that. Do options. Number one, start singing. Okay. It sounds strange, but the answer is I'm trying to revert or change the path of automatic thinking, which is the cursing, to something else. Okay. So I'm thinking A, singing a song that they like, obviously, not something from Omer Adam just came out recently. That's not going to work. And or counting, okay, counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, just counting like what? But yes, this works. Or prayer, start a prayer, okay? Praying is always good, right? Okay, so some sort of prayer which you know by heart, which they know by heart, or a piyut, even if it's from Kabbalat Shabbat and we're on Thursday or it's Wednesday, some sort of piyut, or even on a bikoach, or whatever you want from Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah, or doesn't matter what time of the year, a piyut, a prayer, counting, or a song that they know. You have to start it. Don't ask them, do you want to? You just start, and it's like, what is going on? And their brain will revert and probably stop with the cursing, and they'll be able to go on to something else. Oh, that's it.
Just a final word from Rav Sherla. Yes, that we have an obligation to visit when it's so unpleasant and sometimes disastrous.
There are three main reasons why visiting are very important. The first one is physically, because when you visit, you see if there are needs, if you suffer, if things that the other people that are taking care didn't identify. And as you know, Rabbi Akiva and the Gemara said that he came to visit someone and he opened the window and he cleaned the dust and whatever. And actually he gave them the ability to believe. And then he said, everyone that is visiting is actually kind of mechayem etim in order to do that. The second thing is we really don't know what is the experience of the person with dementia, but we suppose that there is good effect when, even if he doesn't recognize, if you touch him, if you hug him, if you do things, even if we have suspicious, if we don't know exactly what are the results, it's very important, I think, for him. And the third thing is for us, the fact that we don't forget him, we don't forget our commitments, we still have any kind of connection. So these are three reasons that we should visit even a person with dementia. But as I said before, from the other hand, and when it's becoming impossible, when it's coming to becoming dangerous, when it's really, we are going out from it and we are humiliated from this visit, then we have the ability to limit. We have the right to say, we can't. It's kind of, we're abusing ourselves. And as I said from the beginning, we also have needs. So you are permitted to balance between the very important thing to visit even a person with dementia with the fact that you are, I'll say suffering, and then try to find a way. First of all, as we learned before, try to do it in a different way. Try to find a way that you will not go out and go from there in as humiliated or whatever. But if there's no way to do that, you are permitted to limit, but not to to say I'm not visiting anymore forever.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank both Dr. Pear and Rav Sherlo for sharing with us their insights this evening. And thank you all for joining. And I hope and pray that indeed we will have both the siyata dishmaya, the divine providence, as well as the wisdom to age together with our parents in dignity, maintaining their dignity, and of course, the dignity of all those that care for them as well. Thank you all for listening, and thank you all for being with us. This, for those that asked, this will be recorded and God willing put up on our webpage in the next few days. Thank you all very much, and have a good night.
Good night.